Welcome to ICWA Experts. I'm Edward Joseph. Today we're joined by Greg Feifer. Greg is an expert on Russia, a former ICWA Fellow, and a member of the ICWA Board of Trustees. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Edward.
Greg, in your book, Russians, you chart Putin's rise to power and you explain why the Russian people would support a leader like Vladimir Putin. Why is that?
Well, I think the answer, one of the answers, is that Putin is a very careful student of Russian political culture. He has very effectively tapped into centuries of tradition in Russia, and with the leadership, that means obscuring what's going on in the Kremlin's halls with facades and bluster. To us, Putin appears to be a sort of a shirtless, frothing, sort of almost a caricature of a dictator. But actually, he's carefully constructed this persona. To Russians who are humiliated after a decade of economic crisis in the 1990s, being told that they had to look abroad for their models of politics, their economy, and everything else. He's presented himself as a great restorer of Russian greatness. Ultimately, what Putin is doing, I think, is not sustainable. He is spending a lot of money on the military. He is not building Russian infrastructure. In a lot of ways, the country is headed toward crisis. There's poverty, disease, you name it. On many, many levels, what Putin is doing is ruinous to Russia. But I think there's one important thing that we often don't get about what Putin has done in Russia to shore up his power. The common conception, the conventional wisdom, is that as long as living standards continued rising, thanks to the country's great energy wealth, Russians more or less didn't care what the authoritarian Kremlin was doing, as long as they were left alone to live their lives. And so it's been a great surprise that once savings began to become eroded with the plummeting of the ruble, with the shrinking of the economy, it's going to go into recession this year. Why does he still have 86% approval ratings? It seems astounding. I think the real fact is that Putin has used corruption as the glue for his system. Corruption, a culture in which everybody pays bribes, makes everybody complicit. So that if you are known to take a bribe, you can be arrested, put in jail. It enables the authorities to coerce people, but it also co-opts people because they're part of the system. It's not just Putin. He's at the top of a corrupt system that affects the entire country. So even though there's a shrinking pie, as long as Russians have a bit of that pie, I think they'll continue to support him, at least for the foreseeable future.
So what does that mean in the near term for the situation in Ukraine? Is Putin likely to just keep the pot stirring the pot, or is he likely to make a bold move, another move like in Crimea?
Ukraine now is essentially, it's working for Putin. It's a low-level conflict that he can ratchet up at will in order to dominate headlines around the world, which is ultimately what he wants. He's presenting himself as the main opponent to the U.S., and he's sort of picked Ukraine to do this. In 2008, it was Georgia. Well, now he's got Ukraine, and as long as it's a low-level conflict that the West cares about, I don't think he'll make any big moves. I don't think he wants a conflict with a NATO member country, although he will continue to test NATO defenses, again, in order to generate news. And I think that what this means is that Ukraine is a problem for the international community, again, for the West, that needs to be addressed. Putin will continue doing what he's been doing for the past year for the foreseeable future. He wants to destabilize Ukraine. I don't think he has any intention of annexing eastern Ukraine, which is a basket case now. It's in severe crisis. The industry has been bombed to bits. Putin doesn't want to own that. He wants it to belong to Ukraine, and he wants it to be a cancer in Ukraine. So this is a serious problem the international community has to understand, and it really will take Western support for Ukraine in order to ensure that it is a viable state and that things will get better there in the end.
Is President Obama doing enough to provide our allies and provide Ukraine as well with the confidence that it needs, that the Americans are going to stand up to Vladimir Putin and provide the kind of basis, military, financial, and political that Ukraine needs to stand up against the threat that Putin poses?
The short answer is no. Much more needs to be done, and the U.S. really has to take a leadership position on this. The EU is composed of 28 members. Coming up with a consensus is very difficult, and Vladimir Putin has been very effective at essentially co-opting some European Union member states with energy deals, with friendships, with essentially also by exporting corruption. The Kremlin plays a very good game of political influence in former Soviet bloc countries. So it's really up to the U.S. to take a leadership role, and we must be doing much more. Now, there have been times when President Obama has taken a leadership role. He has encouraged and even not coerced, but convinced Angela Merkel and other European leaders to enact sanctions. But again, we need to be providing lethal defensive weapons. We need to be doing more to show Ukraine that we don't support it symbolically and rhetorically, but we really understand that what's at stake in Ukraine are Western values, our shared values, and ultimately the right of Ukrainians to be able to determine their own future.
Greg Feifer, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Join us next time for another in-depth conversation with another ICWA expert. I'm Edward Joseph.